Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I've been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to move forward through another offseason together. As always, please make sure you always find our boots on the ground, 100% free, 24/7 coverage of the Jacksonville Jaguars when you follow us on social media such as Facebook or Twitter at Jaguars on SI. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. Folks, welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. Today, we are going to talk about our continued series looking at each of the Jacksonville Jaguars divisional rivals and getting our blunt and honest assessments of it. Now, I've been on record before saying that I don't really think much of the AFC South. I don't really think of it all that much this year. It's not like a division, like the NFC East or the AFC West or even the NFC West, where there's consistent, dominant teams in the division every single year. It's just not been the case for the AFC South, really, in my opinion, since Peyton Manning and the Colts. You've seen all the franchises kind of take their turns since then at being the team to beat in the AFC South, but nobody's really been able to take the reins. Yesterday we talked about the Houston Texans, who are the last consecutive two-time winners of the AFC South. That has been their division for the last two seasons now, under DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud. And today we are going to talk about another Jacksonville Jaguars rival in the AFC South in the form of the Indianapolis Colts. Now, a few things, when I look at the Colts, we'll just start off with the positives. The things that I think the Jaguars have to be, frankly, present of and aware of. And I think one of the big ones, especially with how the Colts kind of had their season operate last year, the hiring of Big Game Lou, a defensive coordinator. I mean, Gus Bradley, nothing against him. I've never covered the man or met the man, but I've been pretty harsh on his ability as a defensive coordinator on this show over the years. I mean, it just felt like when he was with the Colts, the Jaguars were just hitting the Colts over the head with a hammer and making it look easy. Doug Peterson and Press Taylor kind of really dominated the Gus Bradley defenses. And like I said, I've heard great things about Gus from people who were around him. He got fired in 2016. That was a couple seasons before I started covering the Jaguars. But I've heard great things from people who were around him, people who coached with him, people who played for him. And I think that when you look at what the Colts' biggest issues were, though, last year, it simply was the defense. It was the scheme, how they were coached, etc. Gus Bradley was the central figure of it. So they had to find, for me, the Colts, it seems like they went into the offseason needing to find three things. They, for some reason, were obsessed with finding a tight end. It felt like Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard and Colts fans talked about a tight end pretty much every day of the draft process. And I get it was a big need, but it's also a tight end. And it was clear they needed to address quarterback. And it was also clear that they needed to address the defense as a whole and defensive coordinator. And Gus Bradley, obviously, moving on for him, going to Big Lou. The Bengals' defense was pretty shoddy last year, but I don't look at that as evidence that this wasn't a smart hire. The Bengals have simply not drafted well on defense in recent years, and when stars were getting off their contracts, they were drafting to replace them, and they just didn't quite draft and develop as well as they should have to prepare for some of their losses on defense. So I think when you look past that, Lou had some really bright moments for the Bengals. Was, in my mind, at his peak, probably like a top 10 to 12 defensive coordinator in the NFL. So I think he has that potential as long as he has the horses. So I think he's a good coach. As much as I just joked and even probably admittedly mocked the Colts and their organization's quench for a tight end this offseason, I do like the tight end they got. Bowen's a good player. I mean, not Bowen. I've done that with him this entire offseason process because of the former Jaguars tight end coach and Tyler Bowen. Tyler Warren, Tyler Bowen, for some reason I just associate Penn State with both of them. But I like Warren as a player. Do I think it was enough for Chris Ballard to attempt to win his annual Daytime Emmy on the draft videos when he fell for them? Not exactly. I understand why Loveland was the first tight end drafted. I like Warren's game. Do I think Warren's going to be a game breaker and a game changer in the NFL? Like how maybe 3 or 4 tight ends are? I don't think so. I don't think he's going to be close to Brock Bowers, etc., as a rookie impact guy. But I do like his game, and I do acknowledge that, I'd say most of the NFL has a void at tight end, but I also think that the Colts' void at tight end is probably noticeably larger than a lot of teams. So I like Warren the player. They threw a lot at their secondary. A lot of big money signing Bynum, obviously investing at cornerback, and as you saw from Brian Thomas Jr. repeatedly running away from their cornerbacks last year, the secondary is the biggest area they needed to address. And then, of course, Jonathan Taylor, still huge fan of his game. DeForest Buckner, he's still getting it done. Still one of the better defensive tackles in the NFL. And so I think there are some positives for the Colts, some things for them to try to build around. But I also think their negatives are just too significant. And to me, the obvious negative is the quarterback position. I don't think there's a win for the Colts here. I know all my references are King of the Hill and The Sopranos, but there's a Sopranos scene where Tony is talking to Uncle June about the whole New York situation. He more or less goes, I backed myself into a corner, and I don't see a way out of here. That's how I see the Colts in their quarterback situation. I'm not sure there is any answer at all for the Colts. Obviously, a best-case scenario would be for the Colts to have Anthony Richardson take a huge step and develop. That'd be the best thing to happen. Not for Daniel Jones to take a part of the job. The absolute best thing for the Colts in the short and long term would be for Anthony Richardson to develop and win that job and quite simply become the quarterback that he has yet to be in the NFL. Now, on the other side of that, how realistic is that scenario? I'm not sure that there is a player, and maybe I'm wrong, and if I am wrong, please correct me, please tell me, but I'm just not sure if there's a player who's taken the path of Richardson at the quarterback position and has become a good player. He was a guy who struggled with injuries and inaccuracy at Florida. He has struggled with injuries and inaccuracy in the NFL. I liked his game coming out because I thought, if he develops, he has the chance to be Cam Newton. But he simply hasn't. I think injuries are a huge part of it. He's needed as many possible reps as he can get. He just simply needs to play more because he just has not thrown a lot of passes in his football career, even dating back to college. But all of the things that were red flags coming out of Florida are still red flags. So, yeah, that's the best case scenario. But how likely is it? I don't think it's very likely. So then you look at Daniel Jones. And, if Daniel Jones wins the quarterback job, that to me, it's over for Anthony Richardson. Yeah, he might make a few spot starts here and there, but it's not like when Minshew did in 2020 after they basically quasi-benched him for Mike Glennon and Jake Luton. He was making some starts, but it was like a couple that broken up still living in an apartment together. That's how I would see Anthony Richardson and the Colts if Daniel Jones wins this job. If Daniel Jones is better than year 3 Anthony Richardson in training camp, then it's just not going to happen. And I think Daniel Jones he is who he is. So if he wins the job, it's probably not because he was super impressive or anything. He was just better than Anthony Richardson. So for my money, I'm not sure how many teams have a worse quarterback situation than the Indianapolis Colts. Like the Cleveland Browns have a bad one, but chances are they're going to have a pretty high pick next year. They'll have a second first-round pick from the Jaguars if they want to use it to trade up or something like that. So to me, that's the story of the Colts season and 2025. And that's why I don't see them. Like to me, I see the AFC South as the Texans and then as the Jaguars if they take a step. 2-team race. We'll talk about the Titans tomorrow, but I just don't see the Colts really factoring into it. And it's largely because of the issues and red flags that they have at quarterback. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley, please make sure you download, listen, subscribe, follow on Apple Podcasts and all other podcast platforms. And please don't forget to find us on YouTube. Also, when you follow us at Sports Videos on SI.